Hey there, Mr. Mechnick with a podcast on spectroscopy. Yes, this is the one you've been waiting for, where you get to learn about how matter and the electromagnetic radiation interact. So today I'm going to focus on how we're going to study light. So we've been learning about the electromagnetic spectrum and the concept that all of these different types of waves are generated from different sources, and they have different wavelengths and they have different frequencies. We can use a simple tool to study light from different sources. For instance, we used our own eyes to study the light that was produced when we burned different compounds, and each one of those compounds produced a different color of light. We are now going to be able to use a spectroscope, which is a special tool to actually analyze the composition of different types of light. Astronomers have been using spectroscopes for a long time to analyze distant stars and galaxies and nebula to learn about the origins of our universe. So the tool that we're going to be using is a very simple spectroscope. The spectroscope is a device that is handheld, and when you look through it, you'll be able to see the light shining through here, but inside the spectroscope there will be something that happens which will actually produce a visible spectrum. And depending on your light, you might see all of the colors of the rainbow, or you might just see individual bands. So you might be thinking, how does this spectroscope work? Well, it's a pretty simple device. The ones we have, they cost about $10 a piece. They're made out of plastic. There's a little narrow slit right in this side where you look through, and what happens is you want to line up your eye with a light source. So we'll practice in class by looking at just the window or a white light in the classroom. You will line up and you'll see the light coming through towards your eye. What happens is near the end of the spectroscope there's a very narrow slit. Sometimes they have prisms in here, and this will diffract the light. When the light is diffracted, it actually separates all of the different wavelengths of light into a spectrum. And so on the end of your spectroscope there's a spectroscope scale where we can actually determine the different wavelengths of light that are being produced from that individual light source. So when you view this, you might see something that looks like this. You might see the white light coming in through this narrow slit, and then on the other side of your spectroscope, you're going to see these numbers, 4, 5, 6, and 7. These correspond to the different wavelengths of visible light, ranging from about 400 nanometers up to just over 700 nanometers. So these wavelengths that you can see on your spectroscope correspond to the visible light part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So when you view something, you might end up seeing a bright line at around 500 nanometers. You might see another line at 560, another line maybe closer to 650. So this type of spectrum is called an emission spectrum and is produced by specific types of gases. When they are energized, will release specific wavelengths of light. So your goal in this lab that we will be doing in class is to use different light sources and to identify one of 3 types of spectra that are produced by these light sources. So for instance, if we look at white light produced from the sun, let's say, and you view it through your spectroscope, you might see a continuous spectrum. Every single color will be visible, starting with red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. If you are looking at a heated gas, and many of the gases that we use in class will be specific gases like neon or krypton or helium or hydrogen, and they are energized with the use of electricity, and they will be emitting light. When they emit light, you will view it and you will find specific bright lines that are the unique fingerprint of that gas. And you will be asked to record these down in your lab notebook. You might end up having the same gas, but if it's cold, it's not going to be emitting light, it would be absorbing light. So some of our light sources will actually be absorption gases, and you will view the spectrum and you might see a lot of colors, but there might be gaps, and the gaps indicate the absorption of those individual wavelengths of light. So when you're doing the lab, you will be using these power sources with specific tubes filled with gases. Initially, you're going to know the names of all of the gases that we will be using. So we might use gases like hydrogen and helium and nitrogen, and your job will be to view them very carefully and draw the emission spectrum that's produced by each one of these different gases. So here's an example of different gases and the spectrum that they would produce. As you can see, there are individual bright lines that's unique to each one of these different gases when they are energized. So think about these gases being energized from electricity, and these photons are jumping and they're returning back to their ground state, and when they do that, they're going to emitting specific wavelengths of light. And this is going to allow us to conduct the spectroscope lab, where you are going to be recording approximately 10 to 15 different light sources, and then you're going to be given an opportunity to walk around and look at some unknown light sources, just like scientists do when they use spectroscopes to analyze light. So thanks for listening. Please jot down any questions that you have, bring them to class, so before we start the spectroscope lab, you can ask those questions and you're clear on what we're going to be doing in class. Mr. Mechnick, signing off.